OK, that's the papers, and Joe Hockey is coming up now. But first, here's what the Treasurer Wayne Swan had to say about the opposition's call for a banking inquiry on Channel 9 this morning.
The last thing the system needs is another inquiry. This is just another one of Joe's thought bubbles to escape the fact that he doesn't have a detailed set of policies which will work. Crass populism doesn't work here. What works here is methodical application, the detail, getting it right and getting it in place so the reform is enduring for the long term.
Joe Hockey, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Barry.
I think he's suggesting there that you've rushed this a bit. You haven't had time to think it through.
Well, he would do that, wouldn't he? And he would do that. I, in fact, first suggested a financial system inquiry in July of last year. So, obviously, Wayne Swan needs to get his researchers onto it.
Well, what will you be taking to Shadow Cabinet tomorrow? Give us a sense of what you want the banking inquiry to achieve.
Well, look, Barry, historically in Australia we had firstly the Campbell inquiry, which was commissioned by John Howard back in the early 80s, late 1979, early 80s, and that looked at the entire financial system, how we can have a more competitive system and so on. That eventually led to the issuing of new banking licences to international operators in Australia. It enhanced competition, and it also led to a simplification of operations for the banks. Peter Costello then commissioned the next major inquiry in 1996, the Wallace Inquiry, which led to the conglomeratisation of Australian financial institutions. So they started to move into superannuation and diversify their product base. That was an important initiative that helped to drive competition. Now, surely in the wake of the collapse of HIH and also, obviously, the global financial crisis, now is the time, 15 years later, to have another look at the system and see whether the system not only is competitive, but is it stable enough to cope with future shocks? And this would be a wide inquiry, wide terms of reference, that would look at all the areas of operation of the financial system.
But it seemed to be born out of frustration with the banks when they raised their interest rates above what the Reserve Bank had done, and yet it turns out that the banks were justified in raising those rates beyond the Reserve Bank cash rate.
Well, you've fallen into a trap of some other journalists, Barry. I actually released my 9-point plan 8 days before the Reserve Bank moved on interest rates. 8 days before. And I've been talking about a financial system inquiry since July last year, when at that time Julia Gillard said in defending the government that there was the government had already taken action on competition. I have also previously flagged in last year, it was in fact, that we should extend the government guarantee to the RMBS market to create more funding competition for smaller players. I'd previously flagged amendments to the Trade Practices Act. I did it at a press club this year, said the Trade Practices Act needed an overhaul, so tomorrow's price signalling legislation is not a thought bubble. And it goes on. I mean, this is
but what about the point that I made, though, that despite all the rhetoric against these rises, so the Reserve Bank Deputy Governor is now saying that they were justified?
No, he isn't. No, he actually didn't say that. Rick Battolino actually pointed out that various banks have different funding costs, which is true. But the fact of the matter is that the net interest margin of the banks is still relatively high and around the same levels as it was pre-global financial crisis. Now, each bank will have a different funding profile, but the bottom line is this. Two of our major banks, Commonwealth Bank and Westpac, have around 65% of their loan book tied up in residential home loans. And of course, as various banking analysts have pointed out, if they want to maintain their strong profit growth, then they're going to have to increase their margins on home loans. And this is the issue, Barry. There are only 12 Australian-owned independent banks now. St George is not independent. Bankwest is not independent. We no longer have truly independent Aussie Home Loans and Wizard and Rams. Now is the time to look at competition, because next year, I fear, there will be further challenges to the stability of the financial system. And Australia has to meet head-on some of the funding challenges our nation, and not just our banks, are going to face.
What Rick Badalino did say, though, is that there is no rule preventing banks from going beyond the Reserve Bank cash rate, and it would be quite risky for the financial system to have such a rule. Do you accept that?
He's right, yeah, absolutely. I have never advocated.
Why do you make such a fuss when they do go beyond it?
Well, it's a question of how far they do go beyond it, and in previous times, certainly when I was Financial Services Minister and we're in government, the banks even discounted against the cash rate movement of the Reserve Bank. They discounted against it because that was competition. So I'd say to you, Barry, obviously the cash rate of the Reserve Bank's 4.75. The banks are charging around 7.8. There is a capacity to have competition to reduce that, but I'm particularly concerned about small business. Some small businesses are paying over 10% for an unsecured overdraft, over 10%, close to 11%. And there is certainly a need for more competition in small business lending as well.
Okay, on the NBN, do you intend to go on insisting that the government is spending $43 billion on the NBN? I mean, clearly it's just a little over half that.
Well, how do we know? How do we know that, Barry?
Well,
this is the thing.
Well, the NBN's chief executive has put it in writing now.
Oh, right, okay.
Well, he has no credibility. No credibility on the topic.
Well, mate, look, I'd say to you, I'd want something more reassuring than a letter from the chief executive of the organisation that is spending the money to outline exactly how much is going to be spent. $43 billion is 43 brand new teaching hospitals.
Yes, but before you go on and explain what $43 billion, he says the capital spending will be substantially below that figure, and in any case, the government's peak equity will stop at about $26 billion.
And he says it's exactly the same. Exactly the same. What he is estimating is that he is going to get a commercial rate of return. I think he was talking about 6 or 7% from memory on the remaining money. Now, Barry, look, I haven't got a crystal ball, but I'm prepared to put down good personal money on this. The government is going to turn the NBN into a white elephant. It will not deliver what Australians expect for the cost that they expect. And I fully expect that this will end up being the tombstone of the Rudd and Gillard government.
Well, he says something else. He says he's got no doubt that NBN can provide a service at a price that will be competitive in the marketplace.
Well, sure, if it's subsidised, it can be competitive. But the thing is, it doesn't have competition. That's the argument. It's a monopoly. It's a monopoly. And they're writing out a big fat cheque for Telstra and to buy a copper network that they're going to rip up out of the ground. And then they're going to roll out a monopoly service. And he says it's going to be affordable. Well, of course it is, because it's heavily subsidised by $26 billion of taxpayers' money. And money that could be better spent. I mean, you know, we hear that the government is pulling back on our security services overseas because of cost pressures. So they're pulling back on areas relevant to national security and instead spending money on pink bat school halls and NBNs. Go figure. This is the priority of the Gillard government.
You don't put any store in the argument the government puts forward on its refusal to release the business plan, at least in the short term. They're saying that they will, but not right away. Is because there is highly sensitive and commercial in confidence material?
Yeah, we use that line in government. We use that line.
Did you get away with it?
Well, not always, I can tell you, and nor should we have. I mean, the bottom line is this. They say they're going to release a banking plan after Parliament rises for the year. They say they're going to release the business case for the NBN after the Parliament has voted on the split of Telstra. This is a confused, insipidly weak government that actually doesn't understand how to govern the country. And it's best illustrated by the fact that at every point when we have tried to prosecute in Parliament a case for transparency and openness, the government has opposed it, and sadly, some of the independents have supported any attempts to get greater transparency in the system of government. So,
but if they're saying
it's frustrating for us, and it must be frustrating for you as an intrepid journalist.
But if they're saying they do need to filter out some of this material, and that takes time, and yet in the meantime they're asking you to vote on the Telstra bill, would the answer be give them a bit of time to do this, let it go through Cabinet, and then recall Parliament?
Well, here's a suggestion, Barry. They can copy the document into another file and just press edit delete for those areas that are sensitive, and I'm sure they can get the document out pretty quickly. I mean, 400 pages isn't that challenging, given that the budget is thousands of pages, and so many other documents released by the government on a daily basis are literally thousands of pages. This is just a try-on. They're trying to avoid something, and it looks that way, and it probably is.
What did you make of the OECD report? There was some good and bad there, I'd suggest. Certainly one quote, there are potentially large benefits to be had.
In the broadband plan you're talking about?
Yep.
Yeah, look, there are benefits, but I mean, what I'd say to you, Barry, is this. We had a plan to deliver broadband to Australians with a mix of technology for far less money. And Australians are increasingly looking for mobility, whether it be using an iPad or using a laptop on the train. People are looking for mobility. And wireless is obviously part of that plan, but there are a whole range of different solutions. I'd say to you, spending $43 billion is too much money, and I think the OECD said that as well. It's just too much money, and look, every telecommunications specialist that I've ever met reckons that it's just a joke. You can have it whatever you want. All you've got to do is spend the money. And the problem for Australia is that I think 2011 is going to be a pretty tough year in international capital markets. I think the fact that the world has a tsunami of refinancing of government debt coming at it is going to be a challenge for Australia and Australians' banks. And exactly now is the wrong time to be running a $41 billion deficit instead of a surplus.
Now, this idea of yours to issue taxpayers with receipts to show them how the government is spending their money, the Sydney Morning Herald got hold of your submission to Shadow Cabinet. It demonstrates that you put the word wedge, the wedge issue, into your submission, that it seems as if it was a deliberate attempt to wedge the government.
Well, it's an attempt to find out, sure. Well, if that's a term, I have no problems using that, because the government either believes in transparency and it wants to tell Australians exactly, for example, I happen to have the receipt here, where their tax dollars are going. Either they want to tell them that or they want to cover it up. And you know what their justification was, Barry? They said, oh, well, we're opposing this because it's all in the budget papers, the thousands of pages that come out in May each year. Whereas all I'm saying is that Australians should be told, they should be given a receipt for the tax they pay, and they should be told on a proportional basis exactly where their money goes. For example,
but
a
it's
third
not that
goes
simple,
in welfare.
though, is it? Because that doesn't take account of what the businesses are paying for a start.
No, it's based on a proportional allocation of your income tax. We'll give businesses the same receipt. That's a good idea. We'll extend it to businesses so they can know where their tax is going. I think, look, I'm about accountability, but also significantly, Barry, this tells Australians where their taxpayer dollars are going. And I think I've always believed in this, and we're going to pursue it, I can promise you.
So now you're not simply adopting your thought bubbles, you're adopting mine as well. It's a bit of a worry.
Telling people where their taxes go? Well, I think they're well spent on the ABC, Barry.
OK, thanks for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you.